Well, this comes as President Trump today continues his attacks on the U.S. immigration system. He claims our country's policies are weak and renewed his calls for tougher laws and a border wall. Over the past 3 days, the president's fired off a series of tweets on the issue, attacking everyone from Democrats over the DACA program to Mexico over NAFTA and so-called caravan of migrants. He says that Congress must act despite a lack of support for a clear plan moving forward.
I told Mexico, and I respect what they did, I said, look, your laws are very powerful. Your laws are very strong. We have very bad laws for our border. And we are going to be doing some things. I've been speaking with General Mattis. We're going to be doing things militarily. Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military. That's a big step. We really haven't done that before, or certainly not very much before. But we will be doing things with Mexico, and they have to do it. Otherwise, I'm not going to do the NAFTA deal.
I want to bring in David Nakamura, a White House reporter for The Washington Post. David, you wrote today that the president is heating up his rhetoric as some supporters are kind of growing impatient. Do you get a sense this is all about appeasing to his base?
A little bit of appeasing to his base, for sure. I mean, this is a president who sort of cast himself as a deal maker over this DACA program. He didn't get the deal. And not getting the deal, it wasn't just Democrats who were disappointed in not getting the protections for those undocumented immigrants. But Trump and conservatives have talked about this border wall for a long time throughout his campaign, as we know. It's his #1 promise to his voters, and he didn't get his money for that border wall. And I think you're seeing now the president returning to the really hardline immigration stance that he's had for so long. Talking today about militarizing the border. That's another big step, and it's sort of come out of nowhere. But Trump's saying he's going to take unilateral action. I think it is appealing to his base. And it's also he's playing off of these news reports about this so-called caravan of migrants from Central America. He sort of mischaracterized some of their intentions and who they are. But in talking about it the way he is, he certainly is, I think, playing to those people in his base who've said they want the hardline actions, and they want him to, to not have any excuses. And if he can't get the border wall built, he says he's going to do it with the military. So
he says he's going to do it with the military, but is there specific action that he can take or might be planning to take on immigration, let's say if Congress doesn't cave to his demands at this point?
You know, it's interesting. In a background briefing yesterday, senior White House officials said they're going to actually go to Congress again fairly soon with some issues that DHS has identified to close loopholes in our laws. But if Trump is serious about taking military action on the border, this is a very controversial step for a number of reasons. Trump the other day praised the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas as something as a strong border. And people were shocked that American president would talk that way and sort of suggest that he'd like to see that on the Mexican border. But that would anger the Mexican president, anger the public in Mexico. There's an election coming. It could maybe tip the election in Mexico to a more hardline president of their own. But also you have the NAFTA negotiations and the idea that, the Border Patrol agents have told me in the past they don't like the idea. There was talk of mobilizing the National Guard a few years ago. President Obama didn't go that way, but the state National Guard was mobilized in Texas, and these are controversial moves even within the Border Patrol community.
The president has also been tweeting about this caravan of immigrants headed towards the border. What exactly was he referring to, David? And are they attempting to enter the U.S.?
Well, there was a group of over 1,000 migrants, mostly from Honduras, a lot of women and children as well, that started this caravan. It's apparently something that immigrant rights groups organize almost every year to sort of draw attention to the migrant crisis. And there is a crisis of migrants fleeing these countries in Central America over gang violence and drugs and other economic hardship. But they were apparently intent on driving through Mexico or walking through Mexico to come to the United States border and to try to gain a political asylum, which is not easy. But Trump has latched on to reports about this. Now, just today, he said in the Oval Office that Mexico has sort of broken up and stopped this so-called caravan. And that's true. We have a reporter on the scene down there. But I think the president was trying to use that to sort of frighten people again, to scare people about the state of the border security, even though it's also true that this group of folks, had they reached the border, would have potentially turned themselves into Border Patrol, not tried to sneak over the border. That's how you try to gain political asylum. You give yourself in and then declare asylum and then wait many years potentially for a hearing. And that's what Trump and his officials are saying they cannot have. He doesn't want to see these long backlogs in the courts, and that's why he's trying to stop them before they even reach the border.
And, the president also said that no one's been tougher on Russia than him. He tends to avoid publicly criticizing Putin. So what was he referring there?
It's really interesting because his administration has done some policy changes different than the Obama administration that have been tougher. They've sold anti-tank weapons to Ukrainian forces, something the Obama administration did not want to do in this ongoing skirmish in Crimea with Russian forces and the Ukrainian forces. And he's also just recently, his administration signed on to this sort of group dynamic with allies in Europe to expel Russian diplomats. So the U.S. has expelled 60 Russian diplomats. So they've taken some hardline actions. But as you said, he himself has not denounced Russia for its election meddling in very strong terms. And he also did not, the president himself has not denounced Russia specifically for being responsible for the poisoning of a former Russian spy in London with a nerve agent, which, of course, other European leaders have strongly denounced Russia. So you're having mixed signals. And I think people in other countries and as well as Congress and even here in Washington are trying to figure out what it all means.
So I want to switch gears for a moment. We're also learning that the president called EPA Chief Scott Pruitt to tell him that to keep his head up, essentially. Pruitt's facing a number of ethics questions. What does the president's report suggest about his priorities at this point?
You know, it's interesting. So you have the president himself said in the Oval Office he hopes that Pruitt will be good, and that's somewhat of a message of support, but leaves some wiggle room. And we've seen the president sort of take his time sometimes to maybe fire someone, but then eventually change his mind. So there continues to be these problems at the EPA in terms of Pruitt's own conduct, in terms of there's new reports now that he gave raises to his staff that the White House did not sign off on. And obviously his own spending on trips and first-class travel has been already called into question. So I don't know that there's long-term support there. But for now, I think the president appreciates the direction that Pruitt is taking the EPA and rolling back Obama-era standards on emissions and other actions. And I think for now, if he can deliver on those kind of agenda that the President Trump supports, maybe he will be able to stay for a while.
David Nakamura coming to us from the Washington Post. David, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rena.